Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today is a cold and blustery day. It's the first week in January, and this is the third video I've done today. The first one recapped all the color and texture that I had on my property for 2024. The second one covered how I provided all the fruit that I eat for the year. And this one is going to cover how I grow 90% of the vegetables that I eat during the year. Now, I am a single person. I live in Utah Zone 6/7, and I like low maintenance stuff. Now, I prioritized food growing last year and the year before, and as I said, I've been able to produce all the fruit that I eat, 90% of the vegetables that I eat. So let's go through and show you what I've done, and then the next videos that I do throughout the month are going to talk about priorities and how we can make growing food and growing plants more accessible throughout the year, and why I think it's important to do so, even though it seems like the interest in gardening is waning a little since the COVID years. Now, just so that you know a little bit more about me, I am a single person. I've been a single mother for 15 years. My kids are now grown and gone, but I have gardened all through the time that I had my kids and while I was working. So I do have very limited time. I have a very limited budget, and we're going to talk a little bit in later videos on how you can accomplish this on your own. So let's look right now, see what kind of vegetables I grow, how I've been able to produce enough and preserve enough so that I can provide my own food. So this is my backyard. This is my food production area. Almost the entire backyard has been turned over to food production. We've got my food forest, and that was my last video, which I will link above, what these trees are and what fruit I grow. So we won't be covering those in my videos. And this is the lower section of my property. I have this area of lawn just because having an open area in the backyard where you can do recreation is nice to have. Eventually, maybe this lawn will go away, but right now we're enjoying it. And we'll start over here. Now, the key to producing your own food year-round is succession growing, and that takes a lot of planning, and we're going to be covering that in later videos this year, how you can plan for extended food production. Now, this is January. It is an exceptionally warm year, but look what I have growing in here. This is the south side of my property. I have a temperature gauge in here, and the temperature gauge has shown me that this ends up being the coldest area of my property, even though it's on the south, but it's also the hottest area. It has the biggest temperature swings, but the plants seem to really, really like it. We've got spinach and collards in here. This is for my winter production. And I've also done winter production in the past in this bed, but I didn't have a lot of time this year, so I had to prioritize how much I was going to produce over the winter. But this is what my beds look like. These are Vijayga raised metal beds. I'll have a link down below if you'd like to see what Vijayga beds are all about. Absolutely amazing beds. This cover right here is a Vijayga cover, and it works beautifully. I also create my own covers. I'll probably purchase a new Vijayga cover because those seem to work even a little bit better than my own covers. They're easier to work with. But anyway, I use covers over all my beds. The covers provide shade in the summer, they provide protection in the winter, and you can also put insect netting over them when you need it. So these covers really, really help extend my growing season, and they help make my life easier. Now, one of the main things that I do to help produce as much food as possible is really take care of the soil in my beds and try to minimize the amount of money that I spend. Now, as you can see, my fig trees right here, and like I said, I link a video that will talk about my fig trees and link a video about how I protect them. But I use straw around my fig trees to cover them. Now, as much as possible, I try to find discounted bales of straw, free bales of straw, whatever I can get. Those go around my fig trees in the winter. Once I remove them, once I remove the straw around those trees, I put them on my beds to cover them and to use as mulch. I think straw is a superior mulch for garden beds. It decomposes slowly here in Utah, but does improve the beds, and it holds in the moisture. So these are all Vijayga raised metal beds. I love using raised beds because my area, the soil is really rocky. Let me show you what my soil looks like. This is representative of the soil in my entire property. All of those rocks I've dug out of the ground, and I have quite a few more that are placed around the property that I've dug out with just planting trees and stuff. But this is how rocky the soil is. The hill back here was dug out by the previous owner. The slope right there used to slope all the way down to my house, before the previous owner brought in a dump truck and hauled out, I think he said 10 loads of soil. No, actually he said 20 loads of soil so that he could have a flat area in the yard. I'm so grateful he did that because this property would have been mostly unusable if he hadn't have done that. But because he dug down so far, this entire hillside is composed of mostly rock because we're at the base of the Rocky Mountains right over there. That's the Wasatch Mountains, part of the Rocky Mountain Range. And this is a lake bed, but we're on what's called a scree slope where all the rocks slid down. So this hillside has very little soil, mostly rocks, and you can see how well the plants do on it anyway. So to grow vegetables and annual plants, it's a lot more difficult. I brought in topsoil. I think I have about 6 inches of topsoil over this area to kind of make it a little easier to grow plants. And then I do my gardening in raised beds. So raised beds can really, really help. They are a little more expensive up front, but you can create raised beds with just about any material that you have. So raised beds help. If you have an area, if you live in an area where you can grow in ground, growing in ground works beautifully. I grew in ground in California. But each of these beds have a plan, and that plan makes sure that I have at least 3 seasons, sometimes 4, of successive growing. These beds are empty this year, but this one is also growing spinach and collards and kale like the other bed. I'm not going to open this one up because it's a little too cold to open it, and this is what my own homemade covers look like. They're just PVC pipe hooked over rebar so they don't move, and then greenhouse plastic that I recycle and use all over the place. And this is how I've gardened on this steep hillside. I dug in garden beds, dug them into the slope so the back side is even with the soil, and the front side is above the soil, so it makes these level. This way they hold water easier, and I can utilize this sloped area for my garden. Now all of these beds, all but one of them, are in use this winter. This one right here has garlic in it. This one right here has my fall cabbage. They're still okay. I probably need to get in here and harvest these because they're going to start molding pretty soon. But they're all basically ready to harvest. We also have some smaller kohlrabi that we can harvest. So this is my late fall. I had another bed of these that I've already harvested, and early winter harvest. These are large tree pots that I've repurposed to grow plants in, and they have automatic irrigation in them. All of my beds have automatic irrigation. And I have purple cabbage growing in this one. They seem to be doing quite well. They're still really small heads, but I probably should go through and harvest them because these seem to rot quicker than some of my other cabbages. This had beets that I just harvested 2 weeks ago and canned them up into pickled beets, which are my favorite. And they also have carrots under here. I've been slowly harvesting the carrots, and in the winter they are sweet and delicious. You can store carrots underground in the winter as long as you make sure and protect the tops of them. You know, the ground does freeze. This ground, I think, you know, it's been quite warm. It's not frozen anymore, but it was frozen a couple of days ago. The ground freezes here quite regularly, so sometimes it's hard to harvest them, but they grow beautifully anyway. This bed actually does not have anything in it. This is one of the empty beds. This is where I harvested my last cabbage. And this one has Chinese mountain yams that are ready to go for next year. This is what the tubers of Chinese mountain yams look like, and they're all over the place here. Hopefully they don't become really invasive. I think because they're on top of the ground, they're going to rot rather than grow. Now here in Utah, it's too dry for them to be really invasive, and I'm growing them as an experiment. They seem to do really well. The ones in this bed are 4 years old right now. I've tried digging down to find roots. I've never been able to find the roots on them. And this is another secret to growing my own vegetables, is I do produce my own compost. I have 3 beds that I made here. It's probably about time to revamp these beds. get more pallets to make them. They're just wired together. This is all the garden waste and leaves that I cleaned up this year. And this is a cold composting method. I'll link a video that I produced this last fall that shows how I make this compost. And this right here is what I harvested. It's absolutely glorious, gorgeous compost. This is 1-year-old compost. It took 1 year to go from this to this with very, very little work. So I will link that video up above. So this is the view of all my beds. I have 16 raised beds. Now let's go over what I grow so that I can produce enough food that I'm actually still eating in January. All my meals are made with food that I've grown. So meat, dairy, and things like mayonnaise and stuff like that are the only things that I purchase. Now a little bit later this month, I'm going to be doing another video that shows you how I plan out my garden. But let me go over really quickly a little bit about the succession planting that I do and what I grow so that I can have enough food to just make my own meals with what I grow on a small property with very little time. So like I said and then showed you, I do usually have winter crops. I grow a lot of food indoors. This year I did start another full-time job where I'm working about 50 hours a week. So my grow room indoors, where I usually grow all my winter salads and winter kale, everything in there is completely dead and it needs to be completely revamped. I will probably be doing that a little bit later this month, and I'll take you along with that journey. Maybe, even though it's embarrassing, show you what it looks like now. I have not been in there for 4 months. Everything in there is dead. So I do grow food indoors to help with that. This year I haven't yet. I start all my seeds indoors. I grow food over the winter under cover, and that helps with having fresh food over the winter. And then early spring, starting in March, I start with my cabbage and cauliflower, kohlrabi. I plant spinach and lettuce then. I let my lettuce go to seed, so the lettuce does self-seed. I actually don't end up planting lettuce other than over the winter indoors. So that's in March. In April, I'll do things like radishes, and if I have a little bit of extra room, I will grow some quick-growing things like more spinach, maybe a little bit more lettuce. And once we hit the end of May, when things warm up enough, we plant our tomatoes and our squash and our cucumbers. Actually, cucumbers go in later in July when I get more room in my garden beds. I do winter squash and I do summer squash. Now, I have grown sweet potatoes in the past, but I am on a diet where I need to limit my carbs as much as possible. I don't do keto. And I'm finding that sweet potatoes just are a little bit too much carb for me. They affect my body and I just can't eat them. So I think I won't be growing sweet potatoes anymore. But that'll open more beds for winter squash because I can eat the winter squash. I love peppers. I used to not love peppers, but I grow a lot of peppers. Those are also planted in May. Sometimes I'll even wait until June to plant those because the warmer it is, the better they do. If you plant them too early when it's too cold, they tend to be stunted. Then I start my fall planting in the end of July, early August. And once again, I start with the cabbage and kohlrabi. I have tried doing cauliflower that late in the year, but it gets too cold too early in our area. And sometimes we can't get the cauliflower to ripen in time to form the heads. So I'm giving up on cauliflower in the fall. We're just doing that in the early spring. We also plant spinach and a lot of other great things. We can redo another batch of peas because I forgot to mention I do peas early in the spring. And as long as I get those in July or August, then I can get a late fall harvest of those. Once it gets to October, I will plant starts that I've started indoors and I've up-potted into gallon pots. I will put those in October for my winter garden. I did not do that this year. Instead, I just have the spinach, the collards, and the kale. But if I do cabbage, I need it to be almost fully mature before I put it in the ground for the winter. If I do that, then I can harvest them in January and February. Now, like I showed you, the ones that I planted in August, I still can harvest in January. This is January. So if you're really careful in planning, you can have vegetables all year long and feed yourself in a small area. Now, I'd love to hear how long you are able to produce vegetables in your area. If you live in some place like California or Florida, I know that you have a second growing season all winter long where you can grow a lot of really great vegetables. I used to live in Southern California and I would grow all year long. So hopefully this video has been helpful for you. If it has been helpful, I hope you like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.